Hello everyone, welcome back to Mr. Darkvale. Today, we're covering 8 of the most disturbing true trucker stories ever submitted to this channel. Truckers sent these in, and these aren't campfire inventions. Too specific, too consistent, too unsettling to dismiss. We cross-checked the details, and they line up with dispatch logs, CB transcripts, and way station records pulled from routes that never should have crossed paths. Before we get into it, 3 quick things to expect tonight. A driver who finds small handprints on a door that was locked the entire time. A team behind the wheel who has never taken a certain detour again, construction closure or not. And a trucker who still keys up his CB some nights, just to ask if anyone else out there remembers the 2 kids from the ice road. Let's get into it. 20 years I've been driving, dry van freight, coast to coast. And in that time, you learn the road talks to you if you let it. Tire hum changes when weather's coming. Engine note drops half a step when you're pulling a grade you don't remember being that steep. You learn to trust those little signals, because out there, alone in the dark for 14 hours at a stretch, they're the only company that never lies to you. That's why the night outside Worcester still sits wrong in my chest, even now. Because for about 40 seconds, the road went quiet in a way it's never supposed to. I was running a load east, somewhere past midnight, following the taillights of a reefer unit maybe a quarter mile ahead of me on the interstate. Fog had been building off the fields all evening, that low cotton kind that pools in the ditches before it climbs onto the blacktop. I watched those taillights start to soften, then blur, like somebody was rubbing a thumb across wet paint, and then they were just gone, swallowed. And in that same second, I realized I couldn't hear my own engine. Not that it had gotten quiet. It had gotten absent, like my ears had stopped being connected to the cab around me. I actually reached over and turned the radio down, thinking maybe it was bleeding into everything else, but it made no difference. It was the fog, thick enough that it wasn't just eating light, it was eating sound too, packing it in wet and heavy before it ever reached me. I've hauled through weather that could peel paint off a barn, but that stretch of nothing rattled me enough that I took the next exit for a rest area rather than push on blind. Better to sit it out with coffee than run up on the back of somebody I couldn't see or hear coming. The lot was empty when I pulled in. Not quiet empty, actually empty. No four-wheelers, no other rigs. Nothing but the sodium lights buzzing over cracked pavement and a vending machine humming against the block wall of the restroom building, its glow the only warm color in the whole place. I backed into a spot, killed the engine, and sat there a minute, just listening to the tick of it cooling, glad to have my hearing back. That's when I saw them. 2 kids, over by the vending machine. A girl, maybe 11, and a boy a little younger, both in jackets too thin for how cold it had gotten. No car near them. No adult standing off to the side checking a phone or stretching their legs. Just the 2 of them, at 2 in the morning, in the middle of rural Ohio, with fog rolling across the lot behind them like it was pouring in off the fields on purpose. 20 years on the road teaches you to clock things like that instantly. Lot lizards, hitchhikers, runaways, people working an angle. You learn the shape of trouble before your brain even finishes the sentence describing it. And 2 unaccompanied kids, at a truck stop rest area in the dead of night, was trouble any way I turned it over. They started walking toward my cab before I'd even decided what to do about it. I cracked the window maybe an inch, kept my hand near the door lock, and let them get close enough to talk, without getting close enough to do anything else. The girl did the talking. Asked if I could give them a ride, just up the road. Real casual, like she was asking to borrow a phone charger. I didn't answer right away. I was too busy looking at their eyes. I want to be careful how I say this, because I know how it sounds. The sodium lights in that lot throw a particular color, orange-pink, and they catch in people's eyes and give them a little shine, a little glint, same as headlights in a deer. These 2 kids didn't have that. Their eyes sat flat under that light, like a wall a foot behind their face was the only thing you were really seeing. I told them to hang back a second, said I was going to check on something, and I picked up the CB. I keyed the mic more out of habit than plan. Said something like, "Anybody sitting near the Worcester rest stop? Got 2 kids out here alone. That normal for this spot? And I got an answer faster than I expected. Some driver going by the handle Cornbread came back almost immediately, said yeah, he'd seen the same thing back in March. 2 kids, same description. Said drivers around there had taken to calling them the rest stop twins. Some kind of local legend. Said everybody just drives off and doesn't think much more about it. And for a second, I'll admit, that settled something in me. There's a comfort in a story that's already been told, even a strange one. If other drivers had seen the same thing and driven away fine, that was a worn path I could follow too. I almost did. I had my hand on the key, ready to just pull out and let the fog take care of itself. But then the boy shifted his weight, and I watched him do it. A real, physical, cold-legged shuffle, the kind you do when your feet are freezing and your shoes have no socks in them. And when a semi pulled into the far end of the lot, its headlights swinging wide before it parked. Both of them flinched at the light. Actually flinched, shoulders up, like they expected to get hit. Ghosts in a story somebody tells over a CB don't flinch from headlights. Scared kids do. That was the moment the whole shape of the night changed for me. I wasn't looking at something that didn't have a body anymore. I was looking at 2 kids who were exhausted and terrified in a very ordinary, very human way, and I had been about 3 seconds from driving off and leaving them there because a stranger's voice on a radio gave me permission to. I rolled the window down another couple inches and asked the girl straight out if somebody was with them, if somebody had told them to come talk to me. She didn't answer, but her eyes cut sideways, fast, toward the tree line past the vending machines, and stayed there just a half second too long before she caught herself. I followed that look and saw what I'd missed before. A car, dark-colored, sitting nose out at the edge of the grass, past the fog line, engine running low, no headlights on. It hadn't been there when I pulled in, or maybe it had, and I just hadn't looked hard enough. I told them I was calling somebody to help, and the boy actually grabbed the girl's sleeve, said, low and fast, "No, don't, he'll," and stopped himself right there, like the sentence was too dangerous to finish out loud in an open parking lot. I had my phone out by then, thumb over the screen, trying to figure the fastest way to get a location out to a dispatcher without spooking whoever was sitting in that car. And in the middle of that, still trying to buy myself a few seconds, I keyed the CB again and asked Cornbread if he was still in the area, if he could swing back through, get a plate, anything. The answer came back too fast. Not just fast, immediate, like somebody had been sitting with a thumb on the button waiting for me to ask again. And this time, the details were too clean. Not 2 kids, generic, like something passed driver to driver over years and worn smooth in the retelling. He described the boy's shoes, untied, no socks. Described the girl's jacket, said it had a tear on the left shoulder. He hadn't seen these kids tonight. He was describing exactly what was standing 40 feet from my cab, in real time, like he was reading off a card. That wasn't a legend somebody was repeating. That was somebody telling me a story, custom built to make me feel normal about driving away. I set the mic down slow, like it might notice I'd figured something out. Whoever Cornbread was, he wasn't some driver 2 exits back remembering an old sighting. He was close, maybe close enough to be sitting in that dark car at the edge of the grass, running a script over the radio at the same time his eyes were on me through the fog. Because a story that gets told often enough starts explaining itself, and drivers who believe in a ghost don't call the police. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just started my engine. The kids didn't move at first when the diesel caught, and for one long second I thought I understood why Cornbread's story worked so well. Because right then, sitting still under the lights with the engine running and nothing changing, they did look like something that wasn't going to react to the world the normal way. But it wasn't supernatural stillness. It was 2 kids frozen between the fear of staying and the fear of whoever was watching them from that tree line, waiting to see which way I'd brake. I swung the cab forward a few feet and cranked the wheel hard enough to sweep my headlights and the spotlight mounted on my mirror bracket across the far edge of the lot, straight into that dark car's windshield. For a half second, I saw a shape behind the glass, a grown man's shoulders, turning away from the light too fast to be anything but caught. And in that same half second, the kids were gone from where they'd been standing. Not vanished, not faded, but yanked. The girl's jacket snagged and pulled as somebody's arm came out of the dark and hauled her back toward the tree line. The boy scrambling after her, because he wasn't about to be left alone in that light either. I was out of the cab and running before I'd decided to. Boots slapping wet pavement, yelling something useless. And I got maybe 30 feet before I heard the car door and the engine spike and knew I wasn't catching anything on foot. What I did catch, just barely, in that spotlight beam, was 3 digits and a partial off the plate before it swung wide onto the exit ramp and disappeared into the fog, same as those taillights had earlier that night. I called it in for real this time, gave the dispatcher the partial plate, the mile marker, the description, told her 2 kids had just been taken off a lot in front of me by force. State troopers were there inside 20 minutes, and by then there was nothing in that parking lot but me, my rig, and a vending machine still humming against the wall like nothing had happened. I didn't hear anything more about it for almost 2 months. Then, running that same stretch of interstate on a return trip, I picked up chatter on the CB, different driver this time, talking about troopers rolling up on a house not 40 minutes off that corridor, a small operation that had been working rest stops for years, using kids, some runaways, some taken outright, as bait to get lone drivers to slow down, to open a door, sometimes worse than a robbery. 2 adults arrested. A handful of kids recovered, and running underneath all of it, apparently, for at least 3 years, was a story truckers had been passing hand to hand over the radio about a couple of ghost kids nobody could ever quite catch. A story just useful enough, just believable enough, to keep drivers explaining away exactly what they were looking at. I still run that route sometimes, but I don't stop at that rest area anymore. Not because I think there's anything haunting that stretch of pavement. It's because every time I think about pulling in, I remember how close I came to believing a story that existed for the sole purpose of making me drive away, and how many other nights, other drivers, might have heard that same story secondhand, nodded along, and done exactly what it was built to make them do. The 2 kids were still in that booth when I came in, sitting across from each other with plates of fries neither one had touched, and both of them were looking at the door. Not the way kids look at a door when they're bored, glancing up every few seconds, hoping to see a parent walk in from the parking lot. This was steady, locked on, like they'd been told exactly what time someone was supposed to show up, and they were counting down the seconds until he did. I run packages at night, have for about 2 years now. Box truck, mostly medical supplies and overnight freight, between 2 warehouses that don't like paying day rates. My route cuts through a stretch of state highway that doesn't have much on it, besides gas stations, and 1 diner that never closes. The kind of place that exists because truckers need somewhere to sit down that isn't a cab. I stop there most nights around 3, get coffee, sit for 20 minutes before the second half of my run. I know the waitresses. I know which booth has the wobbly leg. That night there was only 1 other customer, an older guy at the counter working on eggs, and the waitress behind the register doing inventory on cigarette cartons, and the 2 kids. A boy who looked maybe 9, a girl who looked maybe 6, both of them clean, dressed fine, nothing about their clothes that said runaway or trouble. That was almost worse. If they'd looked rough, I could have made sense of it fast in my head and moved on. They looked like they belonged somewhere, just not there. I got my coffee to go and asked the waitress, low, if those 2 were hers, if she knew whose they were. She didn't even look over at the booth when she answered. Said they'd been sitting there since before her shift started at 11. And no, she didn't know them. And no, she wasn't going back over there again to ask. I asked her what she meant by again, and she just shook her head and told me to enjoy my coffee. I should have left it there. I didn't. I walked toward the door on my way out, and the boy said my name. Not "Hey, mister." My actual name, the one stitched on my work shirt. Except I don't wear a name tag. I wear a company polo with the logo on the chest. No name anywhere on it. He said it soft, like he already knew I'd stop. And he did. And both of them looked up at me at the same time and asked if I'd come sit with them for a minute. Said they were just waiting on someone and it was taking a while. I sat. I don't know why. except that something about being asked directly, by name, made it feel ruder to say no than to say yes. Up close, the girl had a scrape on her knee that looked a few days old, already scabbed, and the boy kept his hands flat on the table like he was steadying himself. I asked who they were waiting on. The boy said, him, like that was a complete answer, like I was supposed to already know who that meant. I asked if they wanted me to call somebody, a parent, the police, anybody, and the girl said no fast, too fast, and looked at the door again. That's when the waitress came over, and this part I remember clean, because of how she did it. She didn't walk to the booth. She stood at the end of the counter and waved me over instead. And when I got there, she kept her voice down and told me this was the third night this week those two had been in that booth at that hour. And every time somebody sat with them, offered to help, went to call somebody, the kids were gone before anyone came back. Not walked out gone. Just not there anymore. She'd had a trucker 2 weeks back who said the exact same thing had happened to him, sat with them, went to the bathroom, came back, and the booth was empty, and nobody at the counter had seen them leave. She hadn't seen that driver since. Said he used to come through regular, same as me, and just stopped. I told her maybe he changed routes. She said maybe. She didn't sound like she believed it. I went back to pay my bill, because staying felt worse than leaving now, and while I was digging out cash, something clicked that had been sitting in the back of my head since I sat down with those kids, something I hadn't placed until right then. Back in the spring, a driver named Wexler used to run the same overnight loop I do. We'd talk on Channel 19 most nights just to stay awake. He told me once about a diner off a state route, 2 kids in a booth at 3 in the morning, waiting on someone. Wouldn't say who, just him. Told it like a story he'd heard from somebody else. The way you pass around something spooky to kill time on a long haul. I remember laughing it off on the radio. Wexler stopped running that loop not long after. I never thought about why until that second, standing at the register with my card in my hand, because I realized I hadn't heard his voice on Channel 19 in months, and I'd never actually ask anyone if he switched companies or just stopped keying up altogether. I paid fast after that. Didn't look back at the booth. The girl called out behind me. Not upset, just matter of fact, asking if I could give them a ride since he was running late. I said no, without turning around, and pushed through the door into the lot. My truck was parked under the one working light, maybe 40 feet from the diner entrance. Engine cold, doors locked the way I'd left them, and they were already standing next to it. Both of them, right by the passenger door, not out of breath, not having run to beat me there, just standing there, like they'd been standing there the whole time I was inside, deciding whether to sit down with them in the first place. I stopped walking. There wasn't a side exit on that diner. I'd worked that stretch long enough to know it. One door in, one door out, and I'd been watching that door the entire time I sat in that booth, because it was right in my sight line. They hadn't come through it. I would have seen them come through it. I made myself keep walking toward the driver's side, telling myself I could still just get in, lock it, back out, and never stop at that diner again in my life. And when I got close enough to see my own reflection in the driver's window, laid over the dark shape of the truck behind it, there was a third shape in that reflection that wasn't mine, and wasn't either of theirs. Taller, standing just off my shoulder, close, closer than anyone should have been able to get without me hearing gravel under a boot. I spun around and there was nothing there. Just the lot, just the light, buzzing overhead, just the 2 kids by the passenger door, watching me, with the same flat patience they'd had in the booth, like they were waiting to see what I'd do, now that I understood what I was actually looking for. I didn't check the reflection again. I got in, hit the locks, started the engine, and pulled out of that lot faster than I've pulled out of anywhere in 2 years of doing this job. Gravel kicking up behind the tires, and I didn't look in the mirror until I was already back on the highway doing 60 in a stretch that's posted for 45. I keyed the CB about a mile up the road, Channel 19. Asked if anybody running this stretch tonight had come through the diner off the old state route. If anybody had seen 2 kids in there this late, a boy and a girl, sitting alone. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised me some. There was a pause, the kind of pause where you can hear the static breathing under the silence. And then a voice cut in, male, older, said, "Yeah, I've seen." And then nothing. No cutoff sound, no burst of interference, nothing that explained it. The channel just went dead, flat dead air, and it stayed that way the rest of my run, no matter how many times I keyed up asking if anyone was still there. The knock came 3 times before I even registered it as a knock and not just ice shifting on the mirror arm. 3 soft raps, low on the door, right about where a kid's fist would land if that kid was standing in snow up past their knees. I had the cab locked, engine idling for heat, 41,000 pounds of frozen chicken behind me, and nowhere to go, because the pass had been closed since 4 that afternoon. There was no reason for anyone to be out there, not a trucker, not a ranger, not anybody. The way station lot was buried under 8 inches, with more coming sideways, visibility maybe 15 feet, and the wind was doing that thing where it screams instead of howls. So when I heard, "Can you let us in? It's cold out here," in a flat little voice right outside my door, I froze, with my hand on the CB mic, and didn't breathe for a good 5 seconds. I told myself it was the wind playing tricks through the mirror brackets. Trucks do that. Ice does that. I waited it out, and for a minute there was nothing but the reefer humming along behind me and snow ticking on the windshield like static. Then it came again. Same words. Same flat little voice. No shiver in it. No crying. Nothing a scared, freezing kid would actually sound like. "Can you let us in? It's cold out here." Exactly the same. Like a recording looping. Like somebody had said it once and just kept hitting play. I'd been driving 11 years by then, 6 of them solo, hauling reefer freight up and down the spine of 2 states. And you learn things out here that don't make it into any orientation packet. You learn that when something doesn't sound right, you don't go investigate it at 11 at night in a whiteout on a closed mountain pass. So I sat there, with my hand shaking a little around the mic, and I keyed channel 19, mostly just to hear another human voice. "Anybody else parked up top at the scale house, you got ears on," I said. "I'm getting somebody knocking on my door out here. Sounds like kids. Anybody seeing that?" The answer came back so fast it barely gave me time to let go of the button. A man's voice. Older, tired sounding. The kind of voice that spent 30 years talking through a CB speaker. Yeah, I got the same thing not 2 minutes ago. 2 of them. Said they were cold. Wanted in out of it." He paused. "Word for word what you just said. Near enough." That was the first thing that really got under me. Not the knock. The knock I could have talked myself out of by morning. It was the timing. 2 trucks, buried in a whiteout with maybe 15 feet of visibility between them, both getting the exact same knock, the exact same words, within a couple minutes of each other. For that to be 2 actual freezing kids, they'd have had to run from my truck to his, through snow that deep, in the dark, in that wind, and still have breath left to recite the same 4 words like a script. Kids don't move like that. Kids don't sound like that. I sat there doing that math, over and over, and it never came out making sense, and that was worse than if it had just been silence out there. I asked him his handle and where he was parked. He said he was 3 spots down, said his name was Dale, said he'd been running this route since before I had my license. I asked if anybody else on the lot was picking it up, hoping for a third voice to make it a coincidence instead of a pattern. 3 more truckers came back inside a few minutes, one after another, and every single one of them had gotten the knock. Every single one of them had heard those same 6 words. Out of the cold. No variation. No kid ever asking anything different. Never asking for water. Never crying. Never saying they were lost. Just that one line. Over and over. At every truck on that lot. Like something was going door to door, reciting the only sentence it knew. I stopped answering the door in my head right about then. I killed the cab light so I wasn't lit up like a fish tank for anything out there to look at, and I sat in the dark listening to my own breathing and the reefer cycling on the wall behind my seat, and I tried to remember anything I'd ever heard about this stretch of road. That's when Dale came back on, unprompted, and said something that turned my stomach different. "This ain't the first winter this has happened up here," he said. "I lost a buddy on this exact pull-off. Gotta be 9, 10 years back now. Storm just like this one. He got out to check his chains and never made it back to the cab. They found his rig running 3 days later, driver's door wide open, and they never did find him. Company logs still had the note in the file. 2 kids reported wandering the lot that same night, according to the trucker parked next to him. Nobody ever figured out whose kids they were. No family ever came forward missing anybody. I asked him the trucker's name, more out of nerves than anything, needing a fact to hold on to. He said it, and my stomach dropped through the floor of the cab, because it was my father's name. Not a common name, not a coincidence kind of name. My father drove this same route for the same kind of freight, same season, and I'd grown up being told he'd had a heart attack pulled off on a mountain shoulder. Quiet, alone, nothing dramatic. Nobody had ever said way station. Nobody had ever said door wide open. Nobody had ever said 2 kids. I didn't tell Dale who I was. I don't know why. I just sat there with the mic in my lap, staring at my own door, and for the first time all night, I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't random, and it wasn't new, and it had maybe already taken something from me before I ever knew to be afraid of it. We kept talking, low, just to keep each other company through the wind, and somewhere around midnight Dale was in the middle of a sentence, telling me his ETA once the plow finally came through, when his voice just stopped. Not faded, not trailed off. Stopped, like someone had let go of the button mid-word. Then, 3 or 4 seconds later, still open mic, I heard it. A door, a truck door popping its seal and swinging into wind, that specific howl a cab makes when the wind gets a straight shot into it. Then nothing. No scream, no struggle, nothing you could point to as proof of anything, just wind noise and static, and a channel that stayed open and empty for the rest of the night, no matter how many times I called his handle. After that, I didn't touch the CB, except to listen. I sat with both hands wrapped around a coffee thermos gone lukewarm, doors locked, keys in my lap, watching the shape of my own breath in the cab light I'd turned back on, because the dark had started feeling worse than being seen. The knock came again around 1, same spot on the door, same spacing, 3 soft raps. And then the voice changed. It didn't say the same line this time. It said my sister's name. Not shouted, not desperate, just said it soft and plain, the way she used to say it when we were kids sharing a room, when she wanted me awake but didn't want to get in trouble for waking me. My sister, who'd been dead 6 years. Car wreck. Nothing to do with any of this. No reason on earth for anything outside that door, to know her voice, or her name, or the exact tone she used, at 11 years old, asking if I was still up. I had my hand on the door latch before I even registered I'd moved it. I got that close. What stopped me wasn't courage. It was the fact that my sister had never once in her life called herself cold. She used to run hot, kick the blankets off, complain if anyone shut a window. Whatever was outside my truck had her voice, but none of her. And that gap between the sound and the person was the only thing that kept my hand from finishing the motion. I sat back from the door, shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature, and somewhere in trying to steady myself, I made myself think instead of feel, because feeling wasn't getting me through the night. I thought back to pulling into that lot 8 hours earlier, headlights cutting through the snow, and the scale house window lit up with the sign-in clipboard the way it always is at a manned station. I remembered squinting at it through my windshield before the attendant waved me through to park for the night. One name, already down the sheet in pen. Mine. Just mine. No other rig had signed that board before me, and the station had closed and gone dark not 20 minutes after I parked, same as it does every night once the last truck's logged, which meant every voice I'd heard on Channel 19 all night, Dale included, hadn't come from any truck parked on that lot. There'd been no one else out there to check chains, no one else to lose a door to the wind, no one else to go quiet mid-sentence. It had been me the whole night, alone, and something had spent 6 hours building me a lot full of company, just so it could take that company away from me one voice at a time, and watch what I did when the last one went silent. I don't remember most of the hours after that. I remember praying out loud, which I don't normally do, and I remember the knock coming 4 more times, and me not answering any of them. And I remember the exact moment the sky started going gray instead of black. because I'd been counting the minutes by then, like a woman counting down a sentence. The plow came through a little after 7, orange lights swinging across the snow, and I sat there and watched it clear the lot in long groaning passes until I could finally see pavement instead of white. When I got out, legs half asleep, the cold hit me different than it had all night. Ordinary cold, real cold, the kind that just means winter and nothing else. And right there in the fresh plowed snow at the edge of the lot, past where the plow's blade hadn't reached, there were 2 sets of small footprints, kid-sized. They came in from nowhere, no trail leading up to them from the tree line, or the road, or anywhere a person could have walked from. And they stopped dead in the middle of open snowfield. Just stopped. No drift covering them. No second set walking away. Like something had been standing there, and simply wasn't anymore. I was still staring at that patch of snow when the alarm went off behind me. Not the low battery chirp I knew. Not the door ajar buzz I'd heard 1,000 times pulling into truck stops. A new tone, one I had never once heard in 11 years of running reefer freight, cutting through the cold morning air off the back of my trailer, where nothing and no one should have been able to reach all night. I still hear her voice sometimes, even now, better than 40 years gone by. Not in nightmares, nothing that dramatic. More like she's standing just outside a window somewhere, asking real quiet if I could give her and her little brother a ride home. That's the part that never left me. How quiet she asked. Like she already knew what my answer was going to be before I opened my mouth, and she was asking anyway, because there wasn't anything else left to try. I drove a rig for 31 years. Hauled produce, lumber, once a truckload of church pews from Amarillo to Flagstaff that rattled the whole way like they were preying on their own. You see things out on the road, broke down families on the shoulder, hitchhikers with more stories than teeth, whole lives lived out at truck stops at 3 in the morning. But there's only one night that never let go of me, and it happened on a stretch of 2-lane in the high desert, somewhere between El Paso and Tucson, back in the fall of 1978. I'd been driving since Odessa, and my eyes were starting to go soft on me, the way they do when the sun's been down an hour, and the white lines start swimming a little. I pulled off at a gas stop that wasn't much more than 2 pumps, a block building with a Coke machine out front, and a diner attached to it with 4 stools, and a woman behind the counter who looked like she'd been standing there since Eisenhower. My dog Chief was riding shotgun that trip, a blue heeler mix I'd had since he was a pup, and he was usually about the calmest animal you ever met. I got out to fuel up, and that's when I saw them. 2 kids, standing at the edge of the light, where the pump's glow gave out and the dark took back over. A girl, maybe 11, 12. A boy behind her, smaller, maybe 7, holding on to the hem of her shirt with one fist, like he'd fall over without it. She came forward a few steps and asked if I was headed north, and when I said I was, she asked, real soft, if maybe I could take them home. Said it was just up the road a ways. Said their mama was waiting on them. Now I want to tell you, there was something about the way she said it that about broke me open right there at the pump. Not desperate exactly, tired. Like a person who's asked that question of a lot of strangers already and has learned to keep the hope out of her voice so it doesn't hurt as bad when the answer's no. I remember reaching for my door handle. I remember my hand was actually on it. That's when I noticed the things that didn't sit right. It was October, and the desert drops cold fast once the sun's gone, and both those kids were in short sleeves, like it was still July. The girl had no shoes on at all, and the boy had one shoe, just the one, like he'd lost the other somewhere, and nobody had thought to go back for it. There was a duffel bag sitting at the girl's feet, and it was too heavy for her size, the strap already cutting a groove into her shoulder, and when the wind shifted I caught a whiff of gasoline coming off of it, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. And behind me in the cab, Chief started up a low growl I'd never heard out of him before, not aimed at the kids exactly, more aimed at the dark past them, out past the light. I took my hand off that door handle, told the girl I needed to go pay for my fuel first, and I'd think on it. That was a lie, and I think some part of me knew it was a lie even as I said it. Inside, the woman behind the register had been watching the whole thing through the window, and while she rang me up, she leaned in close and said one word, "Don't." I asked her what she meant, And she just shook her head, real slow, and said those two had been hanging around that stretch of highway on and off for the better part of a year, always around dusk, always asking the same thing. Said the drivers who stopped for them didn't always show up at their next scale house on schedule. I laughed it off at first, the way you do when someone hands you something too heavy to hold, but she wasn't laughing, and she reached under the counter and pulled out a folded piece of newspaper, soft at the creases, like it had been handled 100 times, and set it in front of me. It was about a trucker out of Lubbock, gone missing back in the spring. His rig found pulled off in a wash 6 miles from where we were standing. Engine off, radio still playing, cab empty, no sign of him anywhere, and no sign of any kids either. She tapped the paper once and said, "That boy stopped for them too." I paid for my gas with my hands not steady, and I walked back out into that dark, and the 2 kids were still standing right where I'd left them, right at the edge of the light. The girl looked at me with an expression I still can't put a clean name to, something between hope and already knowing. And I got in my truck, and Chief was still low growling with his hackles up, and I put that rig in gear, and I drove north without looking in my mirror until the lights of that station were long gone behind me. I want to say it was easy. It wasn't. Some part of me spent the next 100 miles convinced I'd left 2 children stranded in the middle of nowhere, and there wasn't a worse thing a man could do. For a couple of years after that, I mostly kept it to myself. Told my wife the bones of it once, and she just held my hand and didn't say much, because there wasn't much to say. Then, maybe 2 years on, I was parked up at a truck stop outside Deming, and the CB was going with the kind of chatter that spreads on a slow night, and somebody mentioned an arrest that had been made a few counties over. A man and a woman, driving a stolen step van, picked up 2 kids used as bait to flag down drivers along a stretch of desert road. Once a driver stopped and let them in, the 2 adults would come out of hiding and take the rig, take whatever cash was in it, and leave the driver out in the desert to walk. Sometimes the driver didn't walk anywhere again. It had been going on across 3 states for the better part of 2 years, and it lined up, mile for mile, season for season, with everything that woman at the register had told me. I remember sitting in my cab with the radio still crackling and feeling something drop clean through the floor of me, because I'd built that night in my head as a story about a coward who left 2 lost children on the side of the road. Turned out it might have been a story about a man who almost drove himself straight into a robbery, maybe worse. But that relief didn't sit right for long, because it left a harder question standing right behind it. Were those kids in on it? Did they know what they were doing when they stood there asking? The answer came a while after that, and it was worse than either version I'd let myself imagine. A trucker who used to run that same corridor told me the 2 kids had been reported missing out of a town in eastern Arizona almost a year before I ever saw them, taken from a relative's yard while their mother worked a night shift. They weren't partners in whatever that couple was running. They were captives being used as the softest, safest bait there is. A scared girl and her little brother standing in the light, asking strangers for help, because nobody says no to that, except once in a while, somebody does. I carried that for a long time and didn't know what to do with it. The girl's voice made a lot more sense to me after that, why it sounded the way it did. Tired isn't the word. Trained is closer. She'd probably said those same lines to a dozen drivers before me, and would say them to a dozen more, and every time she said them, she was hoping, in some buried corner of herself, that the next one would just keep driving. It took years more before I got the last of it, and I got it by accident, the way you get most hard truths. I was retired by then, sitting in my recliner one evening with the local news on, and there was a segment about a cold case finally closing out. The couple long since caught, and long since dead in prison, one from a heart attack, one from something else nobody bothered explaining on the air. The reporter mentioned the surviving victim, a woman now in her 40s, who'd agreed to speak about what she'd lived through as a girl. They didn't show her face. They didn't need to. When they read out a line from her statement about a trucker one October night who'd looked at her, and looked at her brother, and driven off anyway, and how she'd spent years hoping that man had lived a long and easy life, because he'd done the one thing that actually helped them. I had to set my coffee down before I dropped it. They also said, near the end, almost as an afterthought, the way these things get delivered on the news, that her brother hadn't survived to see the couple caught. She had. He hadn't. And that was the whole of it, said in about 8 seconds. And then the anchor moved on to the weather. I wrote a letter to that news station that same week, not really expecting anything to come of it, just needing to put it somewhere outside my own chest. I don't know how they found her, or how she found her way to me, but about 2 months later, I got a phone call from a woman with a voice I recognized before she'd said 10 words, older now, rougher at the edges, but underneath it, the same careful, quiet way of asking for something. She asked if I still had a blue heeler dog that used to growl at strangers. I told her Chief had passed on years back, but yes, that was him. She was quiet a second, and then she said she remembered that growl better than she remembered my face, because it was the only sound that whole year that had ever actually been on her side. We talked a long while that night. She told me I was the only driver who'd ever stopped long enough to think it over, and then still said no. Every other one who took them in, she said, either turned up robbed and beaten out on some access road, or never turned up again at all. She said she used to hate me for driving off. Took her a long time, and a lot of nights to understand that driving off was the kindest thing anybody ever did for her out there, because it meant one more stranger wasn't going to get hurt on her account, and one more night passed where at least nobody knew got added to whatever was already broken about her life. I'm an old man now, sitting in a house, a long way from any highway, and I still hear that voice some evenings, when the light starts going soft, the way it does at dusk. Not sad, the way it used to sound to me. Sadder, if anything, now that I know the whole of it, and gentler too, now that I know she made it out the other side of that year, and built something like a life for herself. I think about the version of me that reached for that door handle, and I think about the version of me that took his hand back off it, and I understand now, those were the same man, in the same 3 seconds, just listening to 2 different things at once. One part of me heard a girl asking for help. Another part of me, I guess, heard something underneath that, something a dog can hear plainer than a person can, and it saved my life without ever once explaining itself to me. I've made my peace with not being able to save them both, but I'm grateful, every single day since that phone call, that I got to hear how her story actually ended, instead of spending the rest of my life only ever wondering. Wyatt stood on the brake pedal so hard, the coffee in my cup came up over the rim and down my sleeve, and through a windshield full of fog, so thick, our high beams just bounced straight back at us. There were 2 kids standing dead center of the road, not crossing, not walking toward the shoulder, standing. Feet planted right on the center line, maybe 30 feet out, not moving even as 42,000 pounds of truck and trailer shuddered to a stop, close enough that I could have reached out the window and touched them. I need to back this up, because none of it makes sense, unless you know how we ended up on that road to begin with. Me and Wyatt ran team, split the wheel every 8 hours, hauling a reefer trailer full of produce that had exactly 1 shot at making its delivery window before the whole load got rejected at the dock. Wyatt was maybe 26, had 2 little ones back home under the age of 5, and he drove like a guy who still believed the world was basically decent to people. I'd been doing this 11 years by then. We hit a DOT closure about 90 miles out. Bridge work, full stop, no exceptions, and the Detour sign pointed us off the interstate, onto a county road neither of our GPS units wanted to fully load. Dispatch told us it was that, or an 8-hour sit, and with the load riding the edge of its window, we took the detour. About 20 minutes in, before the fog ever showed up, the CB crackled on Channel 19, with a voice cutting in and out, some other driver, sounded like an older guy, saying something like, "Don't take the bypass past the marker, don't stop for," and then it just died into static. We tried raising him 3 times. Nothing came back but hiss. Wyatt laughed it off, said probably some trucker messing with new guys, but I noticed he turned the volume down instead of up after that, which told me he wasn't as unbothered as he sounded. The fog rolled in maybe 10 miles later, and it wasn't the kind that thins out as you push through it, but it got thicker, and the temperature dropped enough that I remember flexing my fingers because the sleeper felt suddenly cold through the wall. That's when the two kids showed up in our lane. Once we were stopped, the fog lights picked out details the high beams had washed flat. Both kids looked around 8 or 9. One had on overalls, the other a dress that looked like something out of a photograph nobody in my family owned anymore. That boxy, old-fashioned cut. Both of them were barefoot on wet gravel, and it was close to freezing out. Their hair was soaked flat against their scalps, like they'd been standing in rain for hours. Except there hadn't been a drop of rain that night, and the road under our own tires was bone dry. Then they started walking toward the truck, and that's the part that still gets me. It wasn't two kids walking. It was one motion, mirrored, same leg, same time, same angle, like watching someone next to a mirror instead of next to another person. Wyatt's hand went for the door lock before I even registered what he was doing. Fatherhood does that to a guy, I think. Some wire in him just fires straight past thinking. He had the window cracked and was already saying, "Hop up here, get warm," before I grabbed his wrist. What stopped me wasn't a hunch. It was the fog lights hitting those kids' faces as they got close to the glass, and their eyes not doing what eyes do under a headlight. I've driven through the mountains at night my whole career. I've seen deer eyes flash green, dog eyes flash amber, even a bear once, way up in the tree line, throw back a dull orange. Human eyes always give you a little shine, a little glass marble flicker. These two gave back nothing. Flat, wet-looking, like two pieces of asphalt set into a face. Both of them spoke at the same time, not one after the other, not even close together, but exactly together, like a single voice split into two mouths. "Mister, can we get in? It's cold." No stagger, no breath between them. Wyatt's hand froze on the lock. I swept the fog lights along the shoulder while my brain tried to catch up to what I'd just heard. And that's when the beam caught a rusted metal sign, half buried in weeds, off to the right. A historical marker, the kind counties bolt up and forget about. I only got a few words before the fog swallowed it again. Something about a school bus, a stalled crossing, 1960-something. Several children lost. I'd never heard of it before that night. But sitting there with two kids at our window, who didn't reflect light, it landed like a door slamming somewhere in my chest. I told Wyatt to put it in reverse, and I said it in a voice that made him do it without asking why. The second the truck started rolling backward, the trailer erupted with fists hitting the sides, both sides at once, and it wasn't two kids' worth of noise. It was a drumming, uneven, rapid, coming from points along the whole length of the trailer, like a dozen hands were slapping and pounding it out of the fog we couldn't see past. Wyatt was white-knuckled on the wheel, working the reverse and the swing to get us pointed back the way we came, without jackknifing on a road barely wide enough for the rig, and the pounding didn't let up the entire time we were turning. Once we were straightened out, he put his foot down, and we ran that gravel detour harder than any load I've ever hauled. Fog lights useless, headlights just throwing our own glare back in our faces, trusting the edge of the road more than what we could see of it. I kept my eyes on the GPS, which claimed we'd hit real pavement again in a mile and a half. We passed that mark, then another mile, then another. Same gravel, same fog, same nothing, on either side, and for a stretch there. I remember genuinely wondering if the road was somehow longer going out than it had been coming in, if we were running in place, inside all that fog, instead of actually getting anywhere. Neither of us said it out loud. We just kept driving. When the pavement finally showed up under the tires, and streetlights broke the fog apart into something normal again, neither of us said a word for probably 4 full minutes. We pulled into the first truck stop we found, hands still shaking bad enough that Wyatt spilled half a cup of coffee getting it up to his mouth. There was an older driver at the next pump, company logo I didn't recognize, and when we told him which detour we'd come off of, he didn't laugh, didn't ask questions, just nodded slow like he'd heard it before. He said guys at his outfit had started flat, refusing hauls that routed through there, and that a couple years back, his company lost a driver on a solo run, down that same stretch, rig found, pulled half onto the shoulder, engine still running, driver door hanging open, and the guy never turned up. Not a trace. Not ever. He said it the way you'd mention a guy who used to work somewhere and doesn't anymore. No drama in it. Just fact. And somehow that flat delivery made it worse than if he'd made a big thing out of it. We finished the run, made the delivery window with maybe 40 minutes to spare, and put in a note with dispatch to strike that detour from our route permanently. For a while, that felt like the end of it. About 5 months later, I got a call from Wyatt's wife. He'd picked up some solo local work to be home more with the kids, different outfit, shorter hauls, and one night running behind schedule he took a shortcut he must not have recognized as the same road, or maybe he did, and figured it'd be fine in daylight hours. Except it was late and dark when he hit it. They found his truck the next morning, pulled half onto the shoulder, in almost the same spot we'd turned around in. Engine still idling, driver door open, cab empty. No sign of him anywhere along that road. Not then, not since. I don't run team anymore. I drive solo now, and I plan every route 2 days out, just to make sure I never come within 20 miles of that detour again. Every so often, at a truck stop somewhere, I'll hear a young driver complaining about a closure forcing them onto some unfamiliar county road, and I'll walk over and tell them this whole story, start to finish, whether they want to hear it or not. Most of them laugh it off the same way Wyatt did. I just hope one of them remembers it the night it actually matters. The blizzard came down so fast, that day I didn't have time to radio ahead. 1 minute I could see the reflector poles marking the edge of the ice, spaced out every 100 feet the way they string them on that road. And the next minute, I couldn't see my own hood ornament. 26 years hauling freight, and 11 of those years on winter roads up north, and I've never seen a whiteout swallow a stretch of road that fast. I eased off the throttle, felt the trailer start to fishtail just slightly on the packed snow, and made the call every driver up there is trained to make. Pull over. Don't push it. Wait it out. There's a staging pad about 40 minutes past the last checkpoint. A plowed clearing built wide enough for 2 rigs to pass each other, or for somebody to sit out weather like this. Past that pad, there's nothing. No turnoffs, no gas, no cell towers, nothing but 50 miles of frozen lake road stretching north to a camp that only exists because the ice holds long enough each winter to truck supplies in. I pulled onto the pad, killed my speed, and sat there with the engine idling and the wipers useless against the snow. I did my check-in on the CB, told base I was holed up, gave them my marker number. Standard stuff. I've done it 100 times. That's when I saw them come out of it. 2 kids, walking straight out of the white, like the storm just parted and put them there. A boy, maybe 8, and a smaller girl behind him, both in coats that looked too thin for what the temperature actually was that day, which was somewhere past 30 below with the wind factored in. I looked at my mirrors out of habit, some old instinct, checking for a vehicle, a snowmobile, anything that could explain 2 kids being on foot, in a place with no road, in or out, for 50 miles in either direction. There was nothing behind them, no tracks. Snow that fresh should have shown something, even with the wind working on it, and there was nothing but smooth drift, all the way back into the white they'd walked out of. I told myself the wind does that, fills tracks in fast in a blow like that one. I told myself that a few times before I ever cracked the door. I waved them over and let them climb up into the cab. Boy first, then the girl, and I got them settled with the heater turned up, and told them to sit tight, that I'd get help coming. They didn't shiver the way you'd expect. They didn't complain about the cold at all, actually, which struck me at the time as kids being kids, tough little things that don't know any better. I picked up the radio to call it into base, gave my location again, said I had 2 children in the cab, needed instruction. The second the boy said something behind me, just a small comment about the heater, the whole channel dissolved into static. Not weak signal static, a wall of it, like somebody had their hand flat on the transmit button somewhere else on the line. I backed off, waited, tried again. Clear as day until the girl spoke up asking if I had anything to eat, and the static came right back, swallowing whatever base was trying to say to me. I told myself it was atmospheric skip. Happens up there sometimes. Weather systems doing strange things to radio waves. especially in a storm that size. I've heard old truckers swap stories about pulling in country music stations from 2,000 miles off during a bad enough system. So I let it go. I gave the kids my thermos, dug a couple protein bars out of the glove box, and kept talking to them in a slow, even voice, the kind of voice you'd use with a spooked animal, while I tried to figure my next move. It was maybe 10 minutes in when I clocked the patch on the boy's coat. Sewn onto the shoulder, faded almost past reading, but I knew that logo the second the light from the dash caught it right. Norline Freight, a hauling outfit that used to run this exact corridor before they lost their contract and folded up shop. And that was a long time back, more than a decade. You don't see that patch anymore. Nobody's worn a Norline coat in years, not up here. I told myself it was a hand-me-down, something bought secondhand at a swap in one of the fly-in communities. And that's probably true of half the winter gear kids wear up north. But my mouth had gone dry all the same, and I kept my eyes on the windshield after that, watching the wipers fight the snow, not looking back at the kids more than I had to. Something in me didn't want a longer look. I couldn't have told you why right then. I tried the radio again a while later, mostly to keep my hands busy. This time, when the girl asked me my name, the static hit again, but it broke for just a second in the middle, and in that gap I heard a voice. Not bass, not the dispatcher I'd been working with all week. An older call sign, one that got retired off that frequency years back, after the driver who used it stopped running the route. And under it, buried in the static, a second voice, thinner, saying coordinates I recognized, mile markers, on this same stretch of ice. It took me a long few seconds to place it, and when I did, my stomach dropped clean through the floor of the cab, because the voice reading those coordinates was mine. Younger, but mine. A call I remember making, word for word, 12 years back, on a night I try hard not to think about. I set the radio down and told the kids I needed to check the trailer, and I climbed out into the wind, mostly just to get a minute where I wasn't sitting 3 feet from them. The blizzard had thinned enough that I could see maybe 30 feet in any direction, and I walked around the back of the rig, checking straps I didn't need to check, buying myself time, same as I'd been doing since they climbed in. On my way back around, I looked toward where they'd first come out of the storm, half expecting the drift to have filled in smooth again. It hadn't. There were tracks now, small boot prints, clear as anything, and they ran in one direction only, not away from the lake toward the road, like a couple of lost kids walking in from somewhere. They ran from the road straight toward the pressure ridge out on the ice, the buckled seam where the lake heaves itself up every winter, 30 yards past the pad, and then they just stopped at the edge of it, nothing coming back, nothing going anywhere else. Like whatever made those tracks had come up out of that ridge and walked to my truck, and hadn't walked away yet. I stood there a good while with the wind cutting through my coat, and I won't pretend I had a calm head about it. My hands weren't steady when I climbed back up into the cab. The kids were right where I'd left them, the boy holding the thermos cup in both hands, the girl with her boots off, warming her feet by the vent, and she looked up at me and said, "Easy as anything. You always used to call it the Long Lake, not the ice road. Dad called it the Long Lake." I hadn't told either of them my name. I hadn't told them I had kids, or that I'd ever called that stretch of water anything at all. But I used to. Only my own two ever heard me call it that. A stupid private joke from years back. Half memory, half nickname. Nothing I'd said out loud to a living soul in 12 years. It came back to me then in one piece, the way a bad memory does when you've spent that long keeping it in a box. I used to run this same corridor for Norline. I broke the one rule you never break out here, and brought my own son and daughter along for a night run, because they'd been begging to see the lights, and I thought, one trip, what's the harm? Everybody does it once. We were about level with that same pressure ridge when the ice gave under a section that hadn't been marked yet, a lead nobody'd flagged that season, and the truck went through at the back axle before I could get us turned. I got the door open. I got myself out onto solid ice. I did not get them out in time, and by the time anyone reached us, the water had already taken care of the rest. Norline lost their contract over it inside the year. I lost my license for 2 seasons. Lost my marriage not long after that. And I never once told anybody the exact date it happened, because the date was that day, the day of this storm, 12 years to the hour. I sat in that cab with my hands on the wheel and did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the windshield same as I had the whole time, and I understood then it wasn't caution keeping me from looking at them straight on. It was fear, plain and simple, fear that if I turned and really looked, I'd know for certain whose faces those were. The chipped tooth my son never got fixed, the little scar over my daughter's eyebrow from a fall off the porch steps. Or worse, fear that if I looked long enough it would break, whatever this was, and I'd lose them a second time in the same afternoon. The wind had dropped off outside, the storm thinning toward whatever calm follows a blow like that, and I made myself check the gauges, wipe a clear patch in the condensation on the glass, anything to give my eyes somewhere else to be for one more minute. When I turned back around, the cab was empty. No door had opened. No cold air had come in. Just 2 wet patches on the vinyl seat, where melted snow had soaked through, already going cold, and the thermos cup sitting upright, with nothing left in it. I didn't go looking outside. I already knew what I'd find and what I wouldn't. The radio cleared up on its own not long after, bass coming through plain as day, asking for my status like nothing had happened on their end at all. I told them the storm had passed and I was rolling again, gave them a couple hours unaccounted for, and blamed it on the whiteout, which nobody up there questions, because everybody's lost time to weather like that at some point. I never wrote the kids into any report. I never told my dispatcher, never told the company, never told anyone, until just now. I still run that same stretch every winter, and every year on that same day, I still pull into that same staging pad, whether the weather calls for it or not, and I still wait a while before I put the truck back in gear. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I've had 12 years to work out an answer, and I still don't have one I'd trust out loud. The rig had been dead 11 minutes when the knuckle hit the glass. I know it was 11 because I was staring at the dash clock when the alternator light finally won its argument with the engine and everything just quit. No sputter, no warning, the whole panel going black between one blink and the next. I'd coasted the last of my momentum into the gravel apron of a gas station that hadn't sold gas since before my CDL. Dead pumps standing up out of the weeds like grave markers somebody forgot to finish. And I sat there running through my options with 41 hogs in the trailer behind me, getting more nervous by the mile. Called it in. Girl at dispatch said a tow was 90 minutes out, maybe 2 hours. This deep in nowhere. I settled in, cracked a thermos, and that's when something tapped once on my door. Not a fist, a knuckle. Testing. I about put my head through the roof. Nobody walks up on a rig that quiet. You hear boots on gravel. You hear breathing. You hear something. I got nothing. Just the tap. And when I looked down out of the window, there were 2 kids standing at my door, like they'd grown up out of the ground. Boy and a girl. 8, maybe 9. And it was 34 degrees out, with a mist coming down sideways. And neither one of them had a coat on. Just thin shirts, gone see-through with the wet. And both of them barefoot on gravel that would have torn my feet up in boots. I remember thinking, before I thought anything else, that's wrong. Not scared yet, just wrong. The way a math problem is wrong, before you can say why. I rolled the window down 2 inches, told them stay put. I'd radio somebody. The boy just looked at me, said, real flat, can we get a ride? Not asking, reporting. Something about that made the hair stand up on my arms, and I've hauled livestock through back roads for 19 years. I don't spook easy. I told them no, sorry, can't take on passengers, company policy, and I rolled the window back up and hit the door locks, both of them, that heavy double click that usually makes a man feel safer. It didn't. I killed the dome light too, so I could see out better than they could see in, and I sat there in the dark, telling myself I'd done the responsible thing. Around then I remembered where I'd heard the name of this exit before, not the town, the station itself. Guys on the CB call it the pump station. Say it the way you'd say a word you don't like the taste of. I'd always figured it was one of those trucker campfire stories, the kind that gets embellished a state at a time. Don't stop there. If you gotta stop, don't get out. I'd laughed about it over coffee at a truck stop in Bowling Green once. Wasn't laughing now, sitting in the dark with my doors locked against two soaked kids standing in the rain. I checked my mirror to keep an eye on them, and lost about a year off my life, because they weren't by the pumps anymore. They were standing at the back corner of my trailer, same distance apart, same stillness, and I hadn't seen either one of them take a step to get there. I told myself the mirror does that, distorts distance, plays tricks in low light. I didn't believe it while I was telling it to myself. I called dispatch again, more to hear a human voice than for any real reason, and asked the girl, Denise, I'd worked with her 3 years, whether any other driver had called in trouble from this mile marker recently. She went quiet a beat too long, then said there'd been a rig flagged from near there, back in the spring. Driver never checked back in after his last call. Truck was found running on empty 2 days later, with the load spoiled and no note, no driver, nothing. Company chalked it up to him walking off the job. She said it careful, like she'd rehearsed, not sounding worried about it. I didn't feel any better for asking. Out past the pumps, off in the tree line, I caught a flash. Headlights, off, then gone. Like somebody'd killed them the second they clocked I'd looked. My gut did the thing it does when it wants me to be logical, and it landed on the ugliest logical answer: bait. Somebody parked out there running kids up to stalled rigs to get drivers to open their doors, then rolling in and taking truck, cargo, whatever a man's got on him. I'd heard about crews doing worse for less. It fit. It fit. Clean enough that I almost felt relief. Because scared of men I understood. Scared of men I could plan for. Then the hogs went quiet. 41 hogs. And I mean dead silent. Not a squeal. Not a hoof on metal. Nothing. When 5 minutes before they'd been carrying on about the stop same as always. Pigs don't go quiet like that for a stranger walking by. Pigs go quiet like that for a dog, a fire, something with teeth. That silence sat heavier on me than any noise could have, and it put a hole clean through my theory about men in the tree line, because whatever those two kids were, my hogs weren't scared of headlights. The CB crackled maybe 40 minutes later, and a voice came through thin and far off, another driver somewhere on the same frequency, and he used my handle. Said it plain, like he knew exactly who he was talking to and exactly where I'd stopped. Told me, don't answer if they use your name. Told me, whatever you do tonight, don't finish a sentence you start with them. Then the signal ate itself into static, and I sat there working the dial and getting nothing back, no matter how many times I keyed up asking him to repeat. I want to say I laughed that off. I didn't, because about 10 minutes after that, the tapping started again, soft on the glass, and this time the girl's voice came through it, muffled by the window but clear enough. She used a name. Not my CB handle. My name. The one my late daughter used to call me before I lost her to a fever when she was 7. A name not one soul alive still uses. Not my ex-wife. Not my brother. Nobody. I hadn't heard it said out loud in 11 years, and hearing it come through that glass in a child's voice took something out of my chest I didn't know I still had in there to take. I sat with both hands on the wheel, not touching anything else, breathing through my mouth so I wouldn't make a sound, and I let myself think about the pump station, the way you think about a bruise you keep pressing. Somewhere in the back of my memory was a piece of local talk I'd heard once and buried, that this exact lot, 40-some years back, had a family broke down out front same as me, and the father went in to use the payphone and came back to find his 2 kids gone from the car, and they were found 3 days later a half-mile off in the culvert, and the case never closed because nobody could explain how 2 kids vanish from a locked car in under 10 minutes on an empty road. The story didn't come to me new. It came to me like something I'd known the whole time, and just hadn't let myself look at straight. My hand found the door latch without me deciding to move it. I want to be honest about that part. I was tired, and grieving something 11 years old, and freshly ripped open, and some part of me had decided that if it really was her, if there was any version of this, where opening that door gave me back one more second of a voice I thought I'd lost for good, it might be worth whatever came with it. I had the latch half up before I caught myself looking at the window, at their 2 faces close to the glass in the dark, and realized neither one of them was fogging it. Two kids breathing hard enough to talk through half an inch of glass, standing in 34-degree air, and there wasn't a single cloud of breath between them. I let go of the latch, like it had gone hot in my hand. I don't know how long I sat like that, gripping the wheel, not answering, not looking at the mirror, just staring, straight ahead, at dead pumps, and telling myself out loud, over and over, not tonight, until the words stopped meaning anything, and turned into just a sound I was making, to fill the cab. The tapping kept coming and going for hours, sometimes long stretches of nothing where I'd start to think they'd given up and gone, and then one soft knuckle on the glass right when I'd let my guard slip, like whatever it was could feel exactly when I was closest to braking. Tow lights came up the road a little after 4 in the morning, and I have never in my life felt anything the way I felt those two amber beacons swinging into that lot. By the time the driver had his rig backed up and his hook under my front axle, I made myself look, really look, at the pumps, at the tree line, at the whole stretch of gravel. Nothing there. No kids, no headlights hiding in the trees. Nothing but the mist and the first gray coming up at the edge of the sky. The tow driver was an older guy, unhurried. Didn't ask why I looked the way I looked. Just worked his chains. And at one point, he came around to my door to check the hitch, and stopped, looking down at something on the paint below my window. I got out and looked where he was looking, and there they were. Small handprints, 5 of them, pressed into the film of road dust on the outside of my door, kid-sized, fingers spread like they'd been holding on. The old man didn't ask what happened, just nodded once, like he'd seen that exact thing before, on that exact door, on some other rig, some other year, and said, quiet, that nobody local stops at that lot anymore, hasn't in decades, and that I shouldn't feel bad about not opening up. Said it the way you'd tell a man he did right by not swimming out for a drowning man who was already gone. Then he climbed up into his cab, and I climbed up into mine, and we pulled out of that gravel lot with my hogs finally starting to stir and settle behind me, like something had finally let them go. The lot at the Cardinal Plaza off I-70 was still lit up like a carnival when Dale pulled his rig into the last open row, and for a rookie, on his very first solo overnight run, that was exactly the kind of place he wanted to land for the night. 40, maybe 50 trucks sat nose to tail under the sodium lights, engines idling low, reefer units humming, that steady mechanical breath that all the drivers said you stopped hearing after your first month out. Dale hadn't stopped hearing it yet. 6 weeks on the road with a trainer, and this was the first night he was truly alone, with a load of produce bound for Denver, and nobody in the passenger seat to catch him if he messed something up. He backed into his spot clean on the second try, cut the engine down to idle, and sat there for a second just soaking it in. Through the windshield he could see drivers moving between the rows, guys in ball caps walking their dogs along the fence line, somebody's radio playing country low enough that it was more vibration than sound. Channel 19 was alive the way it always was, at a stop this size, drivers ragging on each other about parking jobs, somebody asking if the Waffle House inside was still serving, an old boy with a voice like gravel in a dryer, telling a story about a bear he saw outside Missoula that nobody believed, but everybody wanted to hear anyway. Dale grabbed his logbook, locked the cab, and walked in for coffee, feeling about as good as a 24-year-old with a full tank and a paycheck coming can feel. He was back in his seat, inside 20 minutes, radio still going, and that's when the first thing happened that he wouldn't think much of until later, when he had time to lay it all out and see the shape of it. The channel just started thinning out. Not all at once. A few guys signed off the way they always did. Catch you down the road. Engines revving. Taillights swinging out toward the ramp. Normal enough. But by 11, it wasn't just a few. Rigs that had been parked for the night. Engines already killed. Driver's lounge lights on inside the cabs. Were firing back up. Guys who'd clearly settled in for 8 hours were suddenly rolling out. And none of them were saying goodbye to each other first, which was the strange part, because truckers always said goodbye first. It was practically a rule. You don't just leave a lot without telling the guy parked next to you where you're headed, not at a stop like this, where everybody's been trading stories for an hour. Dale watched 3 of them go in the space of 10 minutes, quiet as anything, headlights swinging across his windshield, and then gone. He tried calling his girlfriend to tell her the first night alone was going fine, and his phone gave him 1 bar, and then nothing. He figured it was just a dead patch, the kind every driver hits eventually out here in the flat middle of the country, and he set the phone down and told himself it didn't mean anything, even though some small useless part of his brain had been counting on hearing her voice. Coffee was going cold, so he walked back inside for a refill and to use the bathroom before he tried to get some sleep. The kid working the register earlier was gone, replaced by an older man, thin as a fence post, with the kind of weathered face that comes from 30 years of gas station lighting. Dale asked him, just making conversation, if it was always this quiet by midnight. The old guy looked up at him slow, the way a person looks at you when they're deciding how much to say. "First run alone?" he asked, and Dale said, "Yeah, actually, how'd you know?" The man didn't answer that. He just said, real quiet, "Keep your ears on channel 19 tonight," and then went back to wiping down the counter like he hadn't said anything at all. Dale waited for more, but the man had nothing else for him, and something about the set of his shoulders told Dale not to push it. Back out in the lot, more trucks were gone. Not just a handful now. Whole rows had opened up, gaps in the lineup like missing teeth, and the strange thing, the thing that snagged in Dale's mind and wouldn't let go, was that he hadn't seen a single driver walk to any of those trucks. He'd been standing right by the door, right in the light, for the 10 minutes it took to get his coffee and use the bathroom. And in that stretch, 4 more rigs had left, and not one person had crossed the lot in front of him to get in one. He told himself he must have just missed it, that people walk different routes, that he wasn't watching that close. But some part of him started keeping better track after that. That's when he saw the kids. 2 of them, a boy who looked about 8 and a girl a little older, moving between the rigs out past the fuel islands. No coats on, though it was cold enough that Dale's own breath was fogging. No adult in sight. He watched them for a second, the concerned citizen part of his brain kicking in. Whose kids are those? Why are they out here alone this late? And he almost went looking for an employee to flag down about it. He walked back toward the store to do exactly that, and found the door locked. Lights still on inside, cooler humming, but locked. At a place that advertised itself on a 6-foot sign as open 24 hours. He knocked. Nobody came. He stood there a second with his hand still up against the glass, and for the first time that night, the good, proud feeling from 3 hours ago was completely gone, replaced by something flatter and colder that he didn't have a name for yet. He walked back to his truck fast, climbed up, locked the door behind him out of a habit he didn't examine too closely, and sat in the driver's seat with the dome light off, telling himself he'd sleep this off, and everything would look normal by morning. He'd almost talked himself into it when the knock came. 2 soft raps on the driver's door, right at window height for somebody standing on the step. He looked down, and there they were, the same 2 kids, up close now, faces turned up toward him in the glow off the lot lights. The girl was the one who spoke. "Mister, can we come in? Just for a minute. It's really cold." Her voice cracked a little on cold, the kind of small tremble that goes straight through a person, and the boy behind her had his arms wrapped around himself, the way a kid does when he's actually freezing. Dale's hand was already moving to the lock. Whatever had felt wrong about the night, it didn't seem to matter next to 2 shivering kids standing outside his door at midnight, with nobody around to help them. He was thinking about where their parents could be, whether he should just let them warm up for a few minutes and then walk them inside to find somebody. And his fingers were an inch from the switch when his eyes caught something in the side mirror. Out past the fuel islands, in the gap between 2 parked trailers, there was movement that didn't belong to 2 kids. Shapes, low and still mostly. The kind of stillness that's trying not to be noticed, rather than the stillness of somebody just standing around. He counted at least 2, maybe 3, tucked into the dark where the lot lights didn't reach, and none of them were moving toward the kids or calling out to them the way a worried parent would. They were just watching his truck. That's when the CB, which had gone almost silent for the better part of 20 minutes, cracked open, with a voice Dale hadn't heard yet that night. Older, rough, unhurried in a way that told you the man had said this before. Breaker, breaker, driver in the blue and white Peterbilt back row. You got two knocking on your door right now, don't you? It wasn't a question. Dale grabbed the mic with a hand that wasn't steady and said, Yeah, he did. And the voice came back flat and hard. Don't you ever let them in. Not for 1 second. I don't care what they tell you. I don't care how cold they say they are. You keep that door locked, and you keep it locked till daylight. Dale sat frozen, mic in one hand, the other still hovering near the lock. The girl outside repeating herself now, a little louder, a little more urgent. Please, mister, it's just for a minute. He keyed the mic again and asked the only thing that made sense to ask. Why? What is this? The old driver, he gave his handle as preacher, said he'd been running this stretch of I-70 for going on 26 years, told him plain and slow, the way you'd explain something to somebody you didn't want to have to explain it to twice. Said this exact stop had a name among drivers who'd been doing it long enough, and not a good one. Said the kids show up when a lot's thinned out too fast for a Tuesday night, when the regulars have already cleared out, because they clocked the signs before the new guy even finished his coffee. Said the kids weren't the danger. The kids were the door. Whoever was crouched out there in the dark between those trailers, they were the ones counting on some tired rookie, feeling sorry enough to flip a lock. And once that lock came up, it didn't matter how big your truck was or how strong you were, because by then, there'd be hands on the door from both sides at once, and you'd never get it shut again. Preacher said that's why the lot had cleared out the way it had. Said the veterans who pulled out early weren't running from a ghost story. They were running because they knew what an empty parking lot with kids wandering it at midnight actually meant. And once they clocked it, the smart move was to get gone fast and quiet. No goodbyes. Because the last thing you want to do out here is announce to anybody listening that you've figured out what's going on. Said a couple of them had tried to raise Dale on the radio earlier and gotten nothing back. Figured his scanner was off or he had music going, and by the time they circled back to check, Dale's rig was already the last one lit up in the row. Outside, the girl's tone had changed. The pleading had an edge creeping into it now, sharper, more insistent. Please, mister, please. And Dale, still holding the mic, made himself look down at her one more time. And in that half second, where she thought his attention had shifted back to the mirror instead of her face just went flat. The crying stopped, like a switch had been thrown. No transition, no fading out. Just gone, replaced by nothing at all. And her head turned a fraction toward the dark space between the trailers, like she was checking in with somebody, waiting on a cue. The boy beside her did the same thing half a beat later, too close together to be two separate kids doing the same thing on their own. Dale's stomach dropped somewhere below the floorboards. He didn't say anything into the mic. He didn't need to. Preacher's voice came through low. Yeah, that's them all right. Sit tight, son. I ain't as far out as you think. Headlights swung into the lot maybe 90 seconds later, coming in fast off the ramp, high beams washing across the row and catching the two kids full in the light. They didn't run so much as vanish, quick and low, ducking back between the trailers toward wherever the shapes in the dark had gone. And by the time the second rig, Preacher's it turned out, an old long-nosed Kenworth he'd apparently kept parked at the far edge of the lot the whole time instead of leaving like everybody else, pulled up alongside Dale's cab. The row was empty again, except for the two of them. Preacher didn't get out. He didn't need to. He just idled there next to Dale's window for a long minute, engine running, the two of them not saying much of anything over the CB, because there wasn't much left to say. Eventually, he told Dale to follow him if he wanted, that there was a lot 40 miles up the road that never had this kind of trouble, and Dale pulled out behind him without a second thought, leaving the Cardinal Plaza sitting there behind him, most of its lights still on, lot mostly empty, looking from the mirror like nothing at all had happened in it. He found out later, from a dispatcher who'd been driving longer than Dale had been alive, that the story wasn't new, and it wasn't just a story. There'd been drivers over the years who never called in after a night at a stop like that, trucks found running on empty, in a lot the next morning, with the driver's door standing wide open, and nobody inside. No note, no struggle anybody could point to. just gone. Nobody could ever prove exactly what happened to any one of them, and the trucking companies didn't love the stories getting around. But every driver who'd been doing this long enough had heard some version of it, had passed it along the same way it had been passed to them, word for word. Don't you ever let them in. Dale drove for another 11 years after that night. He still remembers exactly how the girl's voice sounded right before it went flat, and exactly how long 90 seconds felt with his fingers an inch from a lock he never touched. These days, when he's got a rookie riding with him for training, and they pull into some big lot for the night, and the kid in the passenger seat starts talking about how many trucks are parked there, how safe it feels with all those other rigs around, Dale just tells him to keep an ear on Channel 19. And, if the lot ever starts clearing out too fast, on a night that doesn't call for it, with nobody saying goodbye first, Dale tells him exactly what an old man with a voice like gravel in a dryer told him once, word for word, the same way it's been handed down for as long as anybody's been driving these roads at night. Whatever happens, whoever knocks, you don't ever let them in.